Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Obesity Matters Wellness Workshop, where we embark on an incredible journey together towards better health and wellness. Whether this is your first time or you have been with us since we started this program, we are so grateful you are here. And I would also like to wish you a happy new year. My name is Rachel. I'm the Vice Chair of Obesity Matters, and I will be your host for this year-long program. Today's topic is quieting the food noise and cravings, finding peace in your relationship with food. Let's dive into today's topic. Now, to help us explore, I'd like to welcome back Dr. Jeffrey Alfonsi. You are certainly no stranger to our community. I'm wondering if you wouldn't mind sharing just a little bit about your background to help us understand and see that you are actually quite uniquely poised to help us understand this topic a little more.
Perfect. No, and thank you for having me back. It's always a pleasure to be here. And hello, everyone. I am a internal medicine and obesity medicine specialist. I also did some training in lifestyle medicine. And so I do a lot of, kind of just clinical practice, but also because of, various important people in my life that really helped me understand the importance of food, I started product, you could say an app and a digital tool for healthcare providers called RX Food. And the idea is to use technology like image recognition to understand what's on a plate through a picture, but not just look at it in terms of the numbers, try to understand the diet quality and the details, and even starting to get at the environment and what was going on around that food to help really think about food in a more holistic way. And so been really trying to think about this as, we go get blood tests and all these different tests. How can we really understand nutrition in a more quantifiable way and trendable way that can guide education? And so that's really been a really exciting journey since 2017 and taught me a lot. And hopefully I can share some good tips with you today around that.
Oh, that's very exciting. And I think that the more tools that we have to help us navigate this space, the better. Thank you for sharing that with us, Jeff. For today, we've got a few questions that you and I will go through, and then we have some time saved at the end. So for anyone in the audience that would like to ask questions, please make sure to jot that down. First thing I wanted to ask you was about this concept of true physical hunger, and that this came up in the poll as well. I wonder what your perspective is on how we can recognize the difference between true physical hunger and the cravings that are triggered by emotions or habits or even our environment.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a really good question, and something that I do like to talk to my patients about and just have people reflect on that. And it's something that we can build over time. The way I like to just begin is, physical hunger, typically, these are going to be things like, you have your stomach growling, or you feel, that pain in the stomach or symptoms in the stomach. It might be related to, well, I haven't eaten in a long time. So there is a correlation between your hunger and how long you ate last, or how much you ate, right? Or whatever activity you're doing. So what kind of that energy bit that might be going on with it as well. And like I said, tends to be a little more gradual. You may not be paying attention all the time, so you may realize all of a sudden you're hungry, but it does tend to mount a little bit more gradually. And again, this is just the normal kind of biological hormones that are shifting up and kind of saying it's time to eat and I'm hungry. And so I think I like to start with that because I think most people have a pretty good idea of what that is. And so we kind of use that as the physical hunger side. And then we try to, kind of juxtapose that with the kind of the emotional hunger sort of aspect. In this, in general, it tends to be something that may come on more suddenly. You may notice it more all of a sudden. You may have certain cravings, you want certain food with it all of a sudden. And so, it's not just general hunger, it's maybe hunger for a certain thing, right? This is a much more complex bucket, which is why I like to kind of start with the physical hunger bucket definition. And then when I'm talking with people about this, it's really a process I think you learn over time. I think there's some times where it's very obvious you got emotional hunger versus physical hunger. And there's other times where it's obviously more gray, right? And that's where the more you can tune in and understand yourself, the better. And so a lot of the things that I try to get people to do is say when they are feeling hungry is just to start a small kind of mindful process. It could be very quick and just say, when is the last time I ate? Did I eat enough? Does it seem like physical hunger? Or, maybe it's an emotional hunger. What is my emotion, right? Do I feel stressed? Do I feel anxious? Am I bored? Like, is there actually a physical emotion that might be why I have this craving? So I like to kind of help people use that to kind of connect the difference and to figure out which one they think is more likely. And I even just say, at the end of the day, no matter what you do after, if you go eat this or that or whatever you have, the first step is just starting to appreciate which type of hunger this is and getting to know yourself. And I think that's really the most important win, to kind of see it, the differences. And like I said, hopefully those give you some rough guidelines, but a lot of it just comes from practicing it a few times and checking in and just taking that pause to say, does this seem more like stress, or I'm bored, I'm hungry, or I'm actually physically hungry? And I think that's something that's just really helpful to get into a little habit around.
I really like the distinction that you made about speed. I think that one really helps me because the cravings are so fast. And like you said, it's also usually very specific to a certain food item. Like I might know I have something in my cupboard and I'm like, all of a sudden I really, really want it. I'm not saying that I don't go have it, but it does really show me that that might not necessarily be physical hunger. That's most likely just boredom or something else. If I can add to your list of feelings that you have, I happen to be someone that when I feel excited or like I want to celebrate something, I also want to eat foods that are probably not so great for me.
It's a great point. I think, and that's part of it. I think there's a huge host of emotions. That's part of understanding, there's probably some that are more likely for you. And that's part of it, is just checking in on that emotion. And I know there's other aspects of the question I just wanted to touch. You also talked about, the environment. The environment can make a huge difference. And I do also encourage people to note that. And it could be that I walk past this certain thing and I want to eat something, or I drive past this restaurant on my way home and I want to eat something. And so it's kind of every day at 9 a.m. when I'm crossing this, store, I think about, the foods, or I smell something being baked and I want to eat it. So these are also important things to think about, that emotional, that's other cues that you're picking up that then is kind of leading you to say, oh, I want to eat this. So I think knowing that environment is important. I think, again, broadening your emotions, as Rachel said, and even being mindful of habits, right? I kind of put that all in, is that sometimes, you eat out of habit too. That could be a reason, or you might be, seeing a certain cue or an environment every time. These are things, again, that I think are important to think about, all that's driving why you're eating, right? Why you want to eat. And I think it's a really helpful thing. The more broadly you can approach that and think about it and understand it, I think the better that is for you, and just understanding what those cues and triggers are.
I think that nicely leads into the next question that I wanted to ask you. What role does the brain's reward system play in those cravings? And how can we retrain it to help reduce that food noise?
For sure. And I think the brain is obviously the key driver of this. And I'd like to kind of step back and talk a little bit about some of our kind of like brain drivers of why we eat, right? Because I think that's important. The first, there's kind of these three systems that are often talked about when we think about appetite control. And one of them is called a homeostatic system. And, I kind of you can think of this as our core biological needs, right? To say, I have to eat to survive, sort of thing, is the simplest way that I look at that. And you can think about that physical hunger in a way, why you have to eat. And I should say that this isn't a part of the brain we call it the subconscious part of the brain, meaning that it's almost automatic. We don't really control that. And I think that's important.
The final one I have for you, and then we'll open it up to the audience to ask questions, is around taking a balanced perspective. So how can we shift from that view of certain foods being bad? Like obviously the first one that comes to mind is sugar. So shifting from the view that certain foods are bad to a more balanced perspective on nutrition and health.
Yeah, I think that's really, really important. I try my best not to label foods as bad or good, but it's very hard, because I will definitely do that and then catch myself. I think that we're so used to that in society and how we label things. But I think really at the end of the day, and I was telling someone this the other day, this was a researcher, and he studied, I think, like the Mediterranean diet pattern, which about, optimal health. And he said, when you actually look at these research studies, people that were like in the highest category, like the best eaters, were about 50% of the time hitting that diet pattern, right? And so it kind of opens your eyes up that, you don't need to be perfect, that, a variety of foods is okay. And I think that's kind of the one point. I think obviously we need to be mindful that some foods are going to be less healthy for us, especially in higher amounts like sugars, and other foods are going to be more healthy for us, things like fruits and vegetables, in higher amounts, right? So I think there's that concept that, we don't want to say that, we can eat all the sugar we want, right? But I do think kind of knowing that there's foods I want to have more of and there's foods I want to have a little bit less of, but it doesn't necessarily mean that that food that I'm having less of is bad and I should feel bad for eating it, right? It's just something that there's other foods I should try to have more of. And I also like to use the analogy of crowding things out. So, maximize the stuff that you like, that, you should be maybe having more of, those whole grains and fruits and vegetables, maximize those. They might crowd out some other stuff that you want to have less of. But it's okay if you still have some of that other stuff on there, right? And I think that's an important way. And this is something that I'll often say at these talks, but I like to cite something that some researchers did. They were culinary medicine people, and they did this really cool study. And I know probably some of you have heard this, a story about it, but I just think it's such a cool idea. The idea of like a dessert flip, and you can also do a flip for other meals. What they studied was, you think about, you get ice cream and then they kind of top it with a couple berries and like a mint leaf. And then what the researchers did was they actually flipped that and said, we're going to put mostly berries and mint leaves and a tiny bit of ice cream. And people actually ranked their enjoyment very similarly. But clearly the actual makeup of that is quite a bit different. If you're having mostly like mint leaves and berries and antioxidants with just a tiny bit of ice cream, that's different than all ice cream with a few little kind of toppings. And so I always like to challenge people to say, think about your dessert flip. Like, it's okay to have some of that, but try to just, add in more of the stuff you want to have more of, but be proud of that recipe that you come up with. And so, this is my dessert flip and it's really awesome and I want to share it and I'm proud of it. And I created this, and it's just showing that balance, right? You can still have the stuff you like, but you're just trying to shift the proportions a little bit. You're adding something else. And I think that's a really nice way to approach this idea of balance, and not be upset when you have the stuff that you should have, but more be proud of when you're adding more of the stuff you want to have more of.
Morning, everyone. I have a question. Actually, I have twofold, and it's to do with hunger. I'd like to know what it is why hunger will, like legitimate hunger, me anyway, can vary so drastically from day to day. I have some days where, for example, I wrote a salad plate size dinner will be fine. I will feel satisfied. I will feel full. I've thought about the cues. I can realize that I'm satisfied. That's enough. And usually my whole day will go like that. But then I'll have other days where I need like 3 or 4 salad plate sizes of the same food to feel that satisfied and full. And so I don't understand why it goes up and down like that so much. It's crazy.
Is a really good question. And, even though you're kind of getting at this sounds like you're kind of that physical hunger, there could also, I always say, is there an element of emotional hunger on top of it, right? So you're physically hungry, but is there something else going on your day? Are you a little more stressed, or was there other things you did? Did you exercise more? What was your previous meal like? Normally we're pretty consistent in terms of our hunger level, but there will be things like, again, how we slept, the amount of energy we focused on, maybe if we're sick, if there's different changes in hormones that might actually, and another emotions, you think about all these triggers could modify how hungry we are. And so there might be times where you just feel hungry. I think we're more hungry than others. And I think everybody has that. It's probably a combination of some physical aspects and some kind of emotional aspects kind of intersecting here. I do just encourage you, maybe on those days where you're like, hey, I had 3 plates today, think about what you're feeling over the last day. Was there something like that could have been, that you can understand what might be driving that difference, right? Again, thinking both from a physical perspective, how are you feeling? Are you sick? Did you exercise a lot? Emotional, other elements that go through it, and try to find the pattern. And then, sometimes, like I said, there's probably some natural days where people are just more hungry than others. That could be for more complex reasons. So that's probably the way I try to approach that one.
So I'm one of these people that gets visually stimulated, by something, and then using the distraction, etc. But then secondary, then I think about it the next day, then the next day, then the next day, a lot of times until I have it. And so what would be a strategy for putting it back in its place, taking it out of the obsession zone?
That is a really good question. That one is obviously a much harder one, because there's a lot of people that it becomes almost, I'd almost say it's like a negative feedback. The cognitive part is feeding back in almost, right? And it's actually making it harder for the cognitive aspects to manage it. And that is hard. I think typically that's where I would suggest, like, maybe having, if you have more of a, CBT session with an individual or like a healthcare provider, just to work through that emotion, because I think that is a little bit more difficult. Of course, I don't know if anyone on the call wants to share if they have found a way around it, but I find that one just is a little more complex, and is kind of reworking the cognitive thoughts about why that's coming back and understanding what's driving that, so you can try to replace that thinking. But yeah, I don't know if anyone else wants to comment on that, because I do think that's a common, people experience that, and it's a really challenging.
thank you so much, Jeff, for the conversation today. Every time I talk to you, I always write notes because there's like little tips and tricks that I can take away. So thank you for being with us today.
Thank you for having me. And thank you everyone for your participation, comments. I think it's really amazing.
Thank you for joining us today. Remember, our journey towards better health and wellness is not a solitary one. We are here to uplift and support one another. We'll see you next time.